What is up guys, Media Review Mike here. And did you know that for a whole year before I uploaded my first video, I actually had plans to release a several hour long dissertation about my favorite cartoon show of all time? Of course you didn't, this is the first time I've ever mentioned it. Unless of course this is your second viewing of this video, which is just... wow. In any case, I'd written about 11,500 words before realizing that the script sucked mega nuts, and so I abandoned it. I rewatched the series for the first time in 2020 and thought, wow, this show is a lot more flawed than I remembered it being. And then I rewatched it again in 2021 and thought, wow, I was being way too nitpicky 12 months ago. Thing is, I still have pages of notes from my original rewatch from 2 years ago, plus the hindsight of a more honest and less intentionally critical viewing of the show. So to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of this beloved series, I took it upon myself to rank every episode of Gravity Falls, shorts not included. And I'm completely aware that Shea Frillis Productions released a video not at all dissimilar to this one, but his list was different to mine, so it's wrong. So now it's my turn.
Oh, and if you haven't seen Gravity Falls, go watch it and then come back to this video. I will be discussing spoilers, but let's be real, you already knew that.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
I know that it isn't exactly breaking new ground to say this, but Roadside Attraction isn't very good. This one tends to be at the bottom of everybody's list, and that's because it sucks. Keep in mind, even the worst episodes of Gravity Falls are still pretty good quality by the standards of most kids shows, but frankly, I've never even remotely liked this episode. Roadside Attraction feels like a scrapped pilot episode, not one of the penultimate episodes before the finale. If you count Dipper and Mabel versus the future as part of the finale, which I do, shut up. I always skip this episode. It literally has zero redeeming qualities. It isn't funny, there's no development for the plot or the characters, and it digs up the rotting, maggot-ridden corpse of the Dipper's crush on Wendy arc, a subplot that I don't like at the best of times. This episode quite literally has zero reason to exist. I think it's probably trying to give some sort of finality to Dipper's Wendy arc, not that I think it does that particularly well. The writers probably thought that because it was such a big plot point, it deserved some sort of recognition toward the end of the show, but we'd already well past moved on from it by the midpoint of the season, so there wasn't really any reason to bring it up here again. I imagine I'd probably hate this episode less if it was at the start of the season, maybe an episode or two after Into the Bunker. At least then, it isn't, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the last episode before the finale. If it was swapped around, that would make Last Mabelcorn episode 16, which would actually work a lot better, seeing as that episode is Bill-centric and has Dipper and Ford doing sciencey things, something that would nicely tie into Dipper and Mabel versus the future. And even that would emphasize Mabel's annoyance that Dipper is constantly hanging with Ford, because then that would be the second episode in a row where Mabel and Dipper don't hang out. This stuff literally writes itself. In short, garbage episode. Next!
I'm beginning to feel like a rap god.
Love God consists of Mabel using magic to force two people who aren't interested in each other to fall in love. This seemingly didn't go down well with some of the consent fans in the audience, so they had to write into the Journal 3 novelization that, well, the love potion only lasts 24 hours, so really, Robbie and Tandri actually do like each other, otherwise the effect would have worn off. Some real Palpatine was alive the whole time, actually bullshmebulok.
Excuse my French.
This episode has some funny moments, with the I eat kids scene being one of the funniest in the whole show. But by this point in the series, I was just kind of sick and tired of Mabel having to learn that she can't control people's lives. Oh, but she's just a child. Yes, true, but like half of the Mabel-centric episodes are about her having to learn that some people don't like it when she forces her will into them. So maybe she shouldn't do it next time. And then she does. Rinse and repeat for like 10 episodes. I just feel like at this point in the series, some more obvious character development wouldn't go astray, you know? Most of my notes initially rewatching this episode consisted of I hate Mabel, which my opinion has shifted on slightly. I don't like Mabel very much, but I can't say that I hate her as much as I used to. I just wish that she got some sort of character development, and I wish that her actions would result in some sort of lasting consequence for her. Even Weirdmageddon, the apocalypse that she is directly responsible for causing, doesn't elicit so much as an apology from her. I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, this episode sucks. Hashtag justice for Thompson. Land Before Swine caused me to develop early onset Alzheimer's, it's so forgettable. Stan is asked to do something, and then to everyone's surprise, does the opposite. Riveting. And Dipper and Seuss fight for some reason. It's not explained very well. This episode is just a whole lot of nothing. I was never a dinosaur kid, so the Jurassic aesthetic does nothing for me. None of the jokes particularly stand out to me aside from the scene where Stan recounts how he lost Waddles, which is quite funny. I can't stress enough how little happens in this episode. No Primal Potato Mine, 0 out of 10. Time Traveler's Pig is the episode everyone points to when complaining about Mabel, but honestly, Dipper is just an idiot in this one. Like, uncharacteristically stupid. Not only does this supposedly smart 12-year-old think he actually has a chance with a 15-year-old, but he doesn't think to just ask her to duck, or to go back earlier in the timeline, get Mabel's pig, and then have her help him. Mabel trying to guilt Dipper into winning her pig is annoying. However, it doesn't bother me as much as it used to because Dipper is objectively being dumb stupid in this one. Is the episode funny? I wouldn't really say so. None of the jokes really stick out to me, aside from the joke about Mabel guessing the weight of a pig named 15 Poundy. Oink oink, this episode is hogwash. The Deep End is apparently relatively well liked, which surprises me. While it is true that Mermaid Man is the only likable Mabel crush, this episode is dragged down substantially by Mabel forcing Dipper to lose his job when, like, there are other ways of transporting a fish man without having to steal pool equipment. That haha blackmail joke sucks ass, by the way.
Blackmail.
However, Stan losing his mind trying to get a seat before Gideon is quite funny. Mabel's summer boyfriend arc annoys me quite a bit. As a general rule, I'm relatively opposed to children's media that depicts children pursuing romantic relationships. There's like 3 stories that do it well. And even then, I'm being very generous with putting Jojo Rabbit on that list. ABC3 nostalgia check. Gravity Falls plays Mabel's crushes mostly for laughs, which is fine in my opinion. Where it gets annoying is when it's the crux of the episode. Tourist Trap uses Mabel's pursuit of a summer boyfriend to propel the story, whereas The Deep End is solely about the relationship itself. Plus, it explores Dipper's pursuit of Wendy too, which is arguably a more annoying subplot. But I'll get into that, don't you worry, folks. Summerween is an episode based off of a non-existent holiday that's based off of a holiday that practically doesn't exist in my country, so already we're off to a great start. It also consists of Mabel having to learn that her brother should be allowed to make decisions for himself. Again. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, it's inconsequential anyway, because she gets what she wants in the end, which completely defeats the purpose of giving her a character arc. Having said that, this episode is fine. It isn't great, but it's alright. It's not like it's illogical for a 12-year-old to be emotionally mature. It's just annoying that she never grows past said emotional immaturity, at least not significantly. It sucks that Dipper gets all of the character development when it would objectively be more satisfying to watch Mabel mature than Dipper, because Dipper's already pretty mature for his age. This is pretty early in the show's run, to be fair, so I can give it somewhat of a pass. In any case, Stan trying to scare those kids was an alright bit, and the monster was quite cool.
I can show you my
I don't really like body swap episodes for the most part, and Carpet Diem is no exception. Every character is at their most unlikable in this one. Dipper is fully within his right to want his own space, especially since 12 is pretty old for a brother and sister to be sharing a room in my opinion, and Mabel doesn't really have much of a reason to not want her own space, so I really don't see what the problem is. All puberty jokes in kids media are unoriginal and cringe, by the way.
I should really be
No way out of it! Look, it all begins with this little fella, the pituitary gland. He may be little, but he has big plans.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
This episode just feels like a waste of time because neither of them end up keeping the room. No amount of author foreshadowing can give this one any props. Mid-episode. Gulf War is fine. It's a bad pun at worst and a solid introduction to Pacifica's character redemption at best. It's goofy, and Mabel feeling inadequate because one person is slightly better than her at something is also pretty dumb, but other than that, it's pretty alright. Pacifica's a very interesting character to me because in a series so deathly allergic to character development, her growth is explored extremely well considering it's only the focus point of a few episodes. I'll elaborate further on that when I talk about Northwest Mansion Mystery, but what I'll say here is that I would argue that Pacifica is one of, if not the only characters who goes through significant, realistic, and well-paced growth throughout the series.
talk to corporate, approve memos, lead a workshop, remember birthdays.
In Boss Mabel, Mabel gets to learn that being a boss is hard. Does this affect her character in any meaningful way? No, not really. Stan on Cash Wheel is the highlight here and the only reason to rewatch this episode.
And a man provides.
It isn't common for kids shows to touch on masculinity unless it's either criticizing it or emasculating its male characters for comedy, so an episode like Dipper vs. Manliness is an interesting change of pace. It sort of acts like the start of Mabel's constant bullying of Dipper, this time for not being manly, but like, what 12-year-old kid is manly? The Manitors are a pretty surface-level allegory, but that's to be expected from a kid's show. The message of being a man is about standing up for yourself and not being needlessly aggressive is a very unique moral for a kid's show. It's just a shame it's bogged down by boring writing and an uninteresting story. It is the first episode I ever saw though, so it has that going for it. Even if the episode is pretty mid, I can appreciate it trying to actually say something instead of going man bad or my toxic masculinity without presenting any commentary beyond that. Maybe I do like this episode.
Testosterone, pituitor.
Never mind, it sucks.
He would know that Ant-Man has the ability to shrink himself down to become smaller than the taco.
After a run of episodes consisting of Mabel bullying Dipper, Little Dipper is about Dipper bragging once about being better at chess than Mabel, and all of a sudden Mabel is on suicide watch. This episode, much like the previous 6 entries on this list, is mediocre at worst, decently funny at best. I can somewhat give Season 1 a pass for being lesser quality-wise, especially because of how high Season 2 set the bar. It does mean episodes like this end up getting a bit forgettable in the grand scheme of things. It just confuses me that the writers didn't even attempt to weave this idea of Mabel's insecurity into the previous episodes. That would have greatly elevated the quality of this episode in my opinion. The final 5 minutes of Stan tormenting Gideon is very funny though, so it's alright in my books.
Well, I woke up this morning. Then there was a hole.
Ooh, Goody Gumdrops, a compilation of minisodes wrapped into one episode. One of which is actually good. Okay, I'm being a little bit harsh. Bottomless Pit isn't the worst episode in the world. Voiceover, while not being great, isn't horrible. Dipper bullying, as overplayed as it is, works better in small bites like this than dedicated episodes in my opinion. Pinball is just kind of forgettable and not particularly relatable, as I don't think I've ever seen a pinball machine in the flesh before, let alone played one. True Fake is definitely the best one by a wide margin. Honest Stan is hilarious, and I wish it had an entire episode dedicated to it. Of course, we all know that the best story in this episode is Grunkle Stan wins the football bowl, baby! Martin Scorsese, eat your heart out.
Repeat stuff, repeat stuff, repeat stuff, repeat stuff, repeat stuff, repeat stuff.
This episode has aged like my nan, and my nan is dead. So that tells you a lot. Boy bands aren't really a thing anymore, but back in 2013, they were all the rage for picking on for obvious reasons. This episode would be worse if it was later in the series, but because Mabel is still pretty early in her development, or lack thereof I suppose, I can forgive her selfishness here, especially since she learns her lesson in the end. The fact that that lesson doesn't carry over isn't this episode's fault. Dipper and Stan working as a team is fun, although the Robbie and Wendy's split subplot feels weirdly out of place in this one. I kind of wish Wendy apologized to Dipper at the end for getting mad. Like, come on man, he's 12, give him a break. Just a nitpick though, pretty decent episode all round.
Pocket full of glitter, yarn balls,
Hand That Rocks the Mabel is our introduction to Gideon, a character who won't become interesting for another 16 episodes. It's cool that he has the second journal and all, but I can't tell if he's meant to be a comedic relief villain or a serious antagonist at this point in the series. They like to flip-flop a bit. I like Gideon though, and this episode, while not anything to write home about, isn't too bad.
My Little Pony Generation 5 is cancelled! G4, Friendship is Magic.
The Last Mabel Corn is one of those rare episodes where the A plot is lame and the B plot is amazing. I understand that if Ford and Dipper were the focus of this one, then the constant switching between the unicorn stuff and the sciencey stuff would become irritating, but it's by far the more interesting story beat in the episode. The cold open is absolutely sick and really sets Bill up as more of a threat than he had been seen as previously. The scene with the butterfly trafficking was pretty funny too.
Where do you get this stuff? Everyone likes sausage, but no one likes to know how it's made.
Mabel's quest to be considered a good person gets repetitive very quickly, and this episode did not need to end with a giant brawl. It feels jarring and out of place, like, yeah, if someone questions the quality of your character, just beat the crap out of them to assert what a great person you are.
I'm a good person! I'm a good person.
Patty, stop!
I'm a good person.
Patty.
I'm a good person. I'm a good person. I'm a good person.
Now, can I have my hands back? I have a certain gesture I'd like to share with you.
Little Gift Shop of Horrors speed round. Hands Off is a slightly less funny version of Truthache, but it's still pretty fun. A Baconing is garbage juice and I hate it. It foreshadows the ending of Dipper and Mabel versus the future and not in a good way. Clay Day is alright story-wise and really cool animation-wise. This episode would be a lot higher if it weren't for a Baconing, but it's still pretty good overall, even if it isn't canon.
You are a convict, tasked with exploring this anomaly in a makeshift submarine nicknamed the Iron Lung.
Legend of the Gobblewonker was the first episode of Gravity Falls to be written, so the fact that it's as high on this ranking as it is quite impressive. The episode is a fun romp that helps develop the cast further and helps us warm up to Grunkle Stan a little more. Kinda weird that McGucket's son is never brought back after this episode, considering McGucket becomes a major player as the series goes on. If these reviews feel like they're getting shorter and shorter, that's because they are. For a fair amount of these episodes, I don't have a whole lot to say more than just it's good or it's bad, but you just wait until we reach the top 10.
What's your favorite idea? Mine is being creative.
It really sucks that Weirdmageddon Part 2 is so low on this list. With a finale as good as this 3, arguably 4-part long story, having your middle be a complete sidestep where nothing happens until the last 5 minutes is an issue. This episode has to kind of speedrun Mabel's change of heart because they've developed her so little that they've left themselves nothing to work with. The idea that Mabel is hiding inside a fantasy world where she never has to leave, all part of his plan to keep himself alive, is absolutely genius. I think the problem is that this whole segment just feels like a sidestep that could have been shortened down significantly. While it is the weakest of the Weirdmageddon finale, it's still a good time and has a nice emotional ending. Mabel even tells Dipper she'll be okay with him accepting Ford's apprenticeship, which doesn't really mean anything considering Dipper doesn't want it anymore, so her bad behavior is once again rewarded. Oh. Also, Dipper saying we went to heck and back is just so stupid. Like, I know that Disney are really strict and all that, but it baffles me that they got away with all of the stuff that Bill is depicted as doing during the series, but they can't use a biblical term like hell. Like, it isn't even being used in a religious context. Like, what the? And like, they refer to Bill as a dream demon, even though demon is also a religious, like,
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Guess someone didn't get the memo that stripping someone of their bodily autonomy isn't a very good thing. Stanturian Candidate would be a lot worse because of that fact if it weren't so damn funny. This one's a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine. I know it isn't very fondly looked at by most of the Gravity Falls fans, or Gravity Whores as they like to call themselves, and I completely agree with why, but this episode is just so fun and I can't help but love it. Even if its references to meme culture are about as fresh as the vegetables in Chris Chan's fridge.
Scudder and the power of self-respect.
Fight Fighters is a fun love letter to retro fighting games with gorgeous pixel art and a subplot where a 15-year-old feels his relationship with another 15-year-old is legitimately threatened by a kid who is 12. I haven't really gone in depth with my dislike of the Wendy subplot, so I'll go into it here. The idea of Dipper being interested in a girl he knows is too old for him is a pretty cool idea for a story. And it's a story that a lot of kids shows wouldn't have the balls to do. The problem is, it wants to have its cake and eat it too by framing it as if Dipper does legitimately have a chance with Wendy, which he obviously doesn't. So throughout all of the Dipper thirsting for Wendy episodes, you, the viewer, are sitting there thinking, when is he finally going to realize he can't be with her? The answer to that is a very rushed conclusion a few episodes into season 2. Kind of a shame really, because the subplot had a lot of potential that was just kind of wasted in the end. But it would be a refreshing take to have this coming-of-age story that could provide actual depth and characterization, but it doesn't. Anyway, Fight Fighters is a good time with a decent ending. Definitely one of the better Dipper Wendy stories, even if it's still pretty low.
It's Everyday Bro with the Disney Channel flow.
Sock Opera went from being in my top 5 favorite episodes of all time upon first viewing to my top 20 upon a rewatch. And that is because of the ending. Bill possessing Dipper's body is kinda cool, and him trying to figure out how to pilot his body is really funny. Dipper asking Seuss if he wants to know the exact date and time of his death never fails to crack me up.
Hey Seuss, wanna hear the exact time and date of your death?
Okay.
However, it kind of loses me with Mabel's selfishness that just never gets resolved. Like, literally the devil calls her out on it, and Mabel decides her stupid crush of the week is more important than cracking the password to the author's computer. Now, I'm not saying if Mabel was there to help Dipper that they would have actually got the code right, but it's the principle of the matter that bothers me. And Bill straight up calls Mabel out on this and tells her how selfish she's being, so she blows up all her puppets and says, "Aw, sorry for being a little bit selfish, lol. lol, and Dipper just responds with, haha, new phone, who dis? Anyway, regardless of the relative quality, any episode will be elevated by the presence of Bill Cipher. I just feel like he was kind of wasted here and treated like a joke. Definitely Bill's weakest outing. Oh, the inconveniencing. The episode that started the Wendy Dipper subplot also manages to be the most tolerable. Spooky ghost shenanigans with Wendy's annoying friends will always be a good time. The rap that kills the shop owners is absolutely hilarious.
They retaliated with this newfangled rap music.
The lyrics, they were so hateful.
Homework's whack, and so are rules. Tuck it in your shirts for fools.
No!
It was so shocking, we were stricken down with double heart attacks.
This episode has some legitimately creepy imagery and is definitely one of the best horror-centric episodes in the show. The Lammy dance, though, was kind of an underwhelming way to end the episode, if you ask me. Wendy's a cool character, so it sucks that she was so supremely underused in this series. Would not complain if you gave her own spin-off.
There was one time when we were children, he transformed himself into a snake, and he knows that I love snakes. So I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, yeah, it's me! And he stabbed me.
Into the Bunker somehow feels overdue and premature at the same time. Episode 2 of Season 2 feels like a very weird place to wrap up this several episode spanning arc. The events of this episode could have been avoided entirely if Mabel didn't try to force her brother into telling Wendy about his feelings for her, something she knew he wasn't comfortable with doing, and then they all nearly die because of it. Is this brought up again? No. It's nice to see Wendy actually get to do something for once, but after this episode, she gets basically nothing to do until the finale. The ending is sweet though, and a good way to wrap up this arc, or it would be if Roadside Attraction didn't come along and ruin it, that is.
You are the worst. I hate looking at your face. I want to smash it.
I am Brutalitops, the magician. Magic user, baby. What?
As someone whose familiarity with Dungeons & Dragons doesn't extend beyond those 2 episodes of Community, I can't say that this episode spoke to me on a very deep level. Dungeons, Dungeons and More Dungeons is a fun episode that guest stars Weird Al, who brings a solid performance as always. Dipper and Ford bonding is fun, although this episode does feel a bit underwhelming, following up Not What He Seems and A Tale of Two Stands, which, spoilers, are pretty high on this list. The action sequences were fun, and the realization that the weapons can be anything you want leads to fantastic creative ideas. Overall, a pretty decent episode.
Prepare for trouble!
Make it double!
Double Dipper is one of the most relatable pieces of television I've ever witnessed, and that's really sad, but nonetheless true. Dipper overcomplicating everything and getting inside his own head all so he can just talk to a girl in the most, I guess, objectively adequate way possible is something that goodness knows I can relate to. I really like this episode, and I feel it's quite slept on. I would put it higher on the list, but the rest of these episodes are all a fair bit better, especially since the B-plot of this episode is kinda lame. Mabel meets Candy and Grenda, 2 supremely unlikable characters who I don't find endearing in the slightest. Pacifica is introduced here, and that's pretty much the most significant thing that happens in this episode. Also, Tall Dipper is extremely cursed. Seuss and the Real Girl is an episode that teaches us epic Mountain Dew drinking, Dorito munching, drywall punching gamers how to touch grass and converse with real women. It's fun seeing Seuss fall for a girl who likes him for who he is, and Giffany is a pretty cool representation of toxic relationships, something that's a pretty taboo subject for a kids show, especially for Disney. This episode managed to predict the success of both Five Nights at Freddy's and Doki Doki Literature Club, both of which are franchises I have very little to do with. Still neat though. It acts as a solid character study of Seuss, someone who doesn't really have many focal episodes. The exploration of the idea that anyone can find love and you just have to be yourself is a really great message for kids, and feels only slightly passive-aggressively directed towards Disney. Seuss isn't exactly the archetypal knight in shining armor that a lesser writer would likely depict him as in this episode. He gets to prove himself without having to sacrifice who he is at his core. He's perfectly personified in this episode and accentuated by Giffany's reign of terror, mirroring the 2 kinds of love Seuss or people like Seuss would pursue. Over-analysis of a kids show? Check.
Oops, the biggest twist is that it's a children's show, and you're all crazy.
Gravity Falls is not what you call a sleepy town.
Tourist Trapped is the pilot episode of Gravity Falls and is pretty good. It introduces the characters well and has a funny twist that was smartly foreshadowed.
Guess again, sister. Shabam!
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Shabam!
Most shows' pilots are usually pretty garbage, but it just goes to show how solid the writing was from the start here. Plus, the ending leaves room for a solid mystery to come. When I watched this series for the first time back in 2017, I was worried I wasn't gonna like Stan, but thankfully I was proven to be wrong. While there isn't a whole lot going on in this episode, it's definitely solid and is responsible for birthing this brilliant series. So it's pretty good in my books.
Which happens, dads leave, no need to be a pussy about it. Here's what I need.
Blendon's game is a fun exploration of Seuss and gives us some previously unseen context to his character. The moral of family doesn't have to be your blood relatives is maybe a touch overplayed, but the ending is sweet nonetheless. This episode handles its use of time travel a lot better than Time Traveler's Pig in my opinion, as it actually uses it to further the plot in interesting ways. In Time Traveler's Pig, the time machine basically just works as a reset button without fully utilizing its potential. In this one, they actually use it to surf Seuss's time stream and give natural feeling exposition. The Globnar sequence felt pretty rushed, and I almost feel that this episode would have benefited from being a two-parter. However, it's not a massive complaint. Infinite Pizza is objectively a bad time wish, like bro could solve world hunger with that thing. Hashtag cancel Seuss.
Number 12, cock.
Society of the Blind Eye is super cool. We finally get a backstory for Old Man McGucket, a character who was only previously used for comic relief, now has a tragic and impactful backstory that moves the plot forward significantly. The subplot with Wendy wanting to use the memory erasure gun after a big spiel about how dangerous it would be to delete straight Blanchard from her memory is big dumb. If Wendy actually had characterization, there might have been something to do with her in this one, but no. Either way, the society was cool, and the episode directly leads into the next episode, which is another absolute banger. But we'll get to that very soon, don't you worry.
Was the US presidential election of 1800 won by a rap battle?
Irrational Treasure has no reason to be as good as it is. By all accounts, the concept of Mabel being insecure about being too silly is really dumb, but this episode is absolute fire. Quentin Tremblay is a delight, and the whole mystery being solved by Mabel's silliness is fun, even if it does feel pretty contrived. I can excuse contrivances so long as it's entertaining, which it definitely is. Shea Frillish Productions criticized this episode for the fact that the President's Key is never used again after this episode, which I understand. It would be a tad overpowered, so maybe it would have been better if like Gompa ate it or something. That's my headcanon. However, complaining that Bill Cipher, the interdimensional space demon, has a lock and key that could obviously be opened by the President's Key is dumb. The key opens any lock in America. Bill Cipher is not from America. He's from Canada, obviously. I just think that pretending that Bill's lock should have been opened by the President's Key is dumb, because even if they did think to try that, it would make no sense if it actually worked. Anyway, pretty good episode. Northwest Mansion Mystery is the final episode of Pacifica's character redemption arc, and also happens to be arguably the most disturbing episode of the show. 7 animal heads bleeding from the eyes and mouth, people being turned into wooden statues, a guy getting an axe jammed into his head, communism. This episode does a solo job at making this previously hateable character more humanized and relatable through, get this, character development.
We live in the timeline where Pacifica gets more character development in 4 episodes than Mabel does in the entire series. You let that sink in.
I'm honestly surprised they got away with all of this, if I'm being honest. Not that I'm complaining. I feel like kids shows nowadays are afraid of having disturbing elements, so it's nice to see that some kids shows still seek to traumatize their audience. Overall, a really great episode. The moral of the story is that being a communist will result in you dying a horrible death, which I don't think is intentional subtext, but I choose to believe that it was.
Famous faces come to life in beeswax, so it's almost like seeing their cold, lifeless expressions in the flesh.
Headhunters is so slept on, man. This episode goes so hard. It's a murder mystery story about a wax statue of Grunkle Stan that has objectively the best twist ending an episode like this could have possibly have had. The ending fight scene goes hard, Dipper and Mabel investigating is fun to watch, and it foreshadows the reveal of Ford, which we don't even realize until a rewatch. If you're one of the many people who skip this episode or don't like it, I urge you to give it another chance. It is an absolute banger. All my homies love Headhunters, man.
Everything you know has disappeared. It's gonna get weird.
Weirdmageddon Part 1, or XPCVEAOQFOXSO. I don't know if I'm gonna do another take. Or XPCVEAOQFOXSO, as it is officially known, is the first part of the 3-part Weirdmageddon finale. Second, if you include Dipper and Mabel versus the future, which I personally do, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll call this Weirdmageddon Part 1. This episode's amazing. It has great comedic moments and establishes the atmosphere of utter dread and hopelessness of Weirdmageddon so well. Bill Cipher is legitimately one of the best and most terrifying villains in animation history, and he is at his absolute best in this episode, in my opinion.
I would just like to say that as a rich capitalist, I welcome your tyrannical rule. Perhaps I can be one of your, horsemen of the apocalypse?
Oh wow, that's a great offer! How about instead I shuffle the functions of every hole in your face?
However, the episode loses points for cutting Bill's villain song. Like, come on, man, It's Gonna Get Weird is absolute fire. A while ago, when I first got into fan editing, I actually reincorporated the animatic of It's Gonna Get Weird into the story, and it doesn't kill the pacing in the slightest. It doesn't detract from anything. It elevates everything completely. In any case, Weirdmageddon Part 1 is absolutely fantastic.
The zombies are coming.
Scarioki does everything Tourist Trap does, but better. It reintroduces the audience back into this world and furthers the mystery from the Season 1 finale, with Stan finally admitting to the kids that he's always known about the weird and magical shenanigans in Gravity Falls. The subplot with the federal agents is great, and the zombies themselves are a surprisingly graphic design for a kids show. Not that I'm complaining. Although, the way Dipper literally revives the dead to prove a point is kind of dumb, and the ending scene with the karaoke, while funny, makes my head hurt about as much as it does the zombies. Still a great episode nonetheless. The ending is superb too, introducing the portal for the first time.
Anyways, I hope you get this, man. Hit me back, just a chat. Truly yours, your biggest fan. This is Stan.
A Tale of Two Stans may be 20 minutes of exposition, but it's a damn entertaining 20 minutes of exposition. It's cool finally getting introduced to Ford, and while there are a handful of cringy meta jokes about fan fiction, overall it's a pretty entertaining episode that is only somewhat undermined by the next episode being pretty underwhelming. I kinda wish Ford was introduced earlier in the season because we don't actually get to see that much from him, which is a shame. I almost feel like this episode would have benefited from being a prequel episode as opposed to a flashback episode. It's weird that the characters just stand there and listen to this story while federal agents just swarm the Mystery Shack. Either way, it's still a great episode, even if it is overshadowed by its more impressive older brother. But we will get to that very soon. Dipper and Mabel versus the Future is a weird episode. I absolutely love what it's going for. The problem is that Mabel is just so unlikable in my opinion that her actions feel less like a result of her being emotionally overwhelmed that she thinks she's going to lose her brother, and more like she's just not getting her own way and is throwing a tantrum about it. I know that that isn't the case, but because of the writer's refusal to give her any kind of obvious characterization or development, that's how it comes across.
Hello, hi. I wanted to quickly interject and elaborate on this point a little bit, because I know it's kind of a touchy subject. I watched a clip from Alex Hirsch's, who, for those of you who don't know, is the creator of the series. I watched an excerpt from the commentary track that they did for this episode, where he basically explains why it's actually not Mabel's fault that she gets tricked, which I agree with. I think that anyone who argues that Mabel is a bad character because she's tricked by Bill is missing the point. What I don't think it excuses is the whole reason that she makes the deal with who she thinks is Blendon in the first place. Essentially, she is willing to give something of Dipper's without his permission to Blendon for her own selfish gain. Now, if this was a one-time thing, I don't think anyone would be complaining about it. But the fact that this is a reoccurring thing that never gets resolved, and that is never called into question and is never apologized for, that's the problem that people have with this specific bit, and I don't think that people quite understand that, because Mabel fans, and to be clear, I wouldn't describe myself as a Mabel hater. I really want to make that clear. I don't hate Mabel. I just don't agree with a lot of the decisions they made with her character. Anyone who's a sort of Mabel fan might hear the criticisms that Mabel haters have and go, well, she's just a kid, or, well, she was tricked. And it's like, yeah, both of those are true, but in this specific context, they don't really excuse the behavior. What would excuse the behavior is if it was a one-time thing, or if it was an obvious character flaw that got resolved, which it doesn't. And so my point of it feeling like she's just throwing a tantrum, I'm fully aware that that's not the case. I mean, she's just found out her friends can't make to her party, she can't bring her pig home, and now, you know, summer's ending, and now Dipper is going to be staying in Gravity Falls and not going home with her. Of course she's upset, but because of the fact that the characterization to make that obvious isn't there, it does just feel like she's throwing a temper tantrum. So that's kind of the point I was making there, and I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. So back to the video.
However, this episode is still amazing. A part of me wishes that Dipper never refused Ford's apprenticeship in the end, because I would kill to see a spin-off with them working together. An amazing episode with one tiny flaw, much like the next episode.
It's just gonna be another goofy episode filled with silly jokes for kids.
Weirdmageddon Part 3 is the finale of Gravity Falls, and it's amazing. For some reason, on Disney Plus, this episode is broken into 2 parts, which is big dumb, so I'm just keeping it to the hour-long version as opposed to the 2 30-minute parts that those dum-dums at Disney have labeled it to be. I will say though, it does kind of suck that for the finale they don't play the full intro. I hate when animated shows shorten their theme songs for no good reason. It's very sad, especially when the Gravity Falls theme is such a banger. A lot of people complain about Stan's characterization in this episode, which I can't help but agree with. As much as I agree that Ford owed him a thank you, Stan really does ruin the Zodiac just because of his low impulse control. However, defeating Bill with the Zodiac would have been somewhat of an underwhelming ending in my opinion, so I see why they had to have it not work, and I can't say that it's strictly out of character for Stan to lose his temper with his brother. No, what really annoys me is that they gave Stan a perfect ending just for them to undo it by giving him his memory back. I get they wanted a happy ending and all that, but his memory could have come back in smaller increments than they did. Giving the audience hope that he'll be okay is one thing. Completely undoing his sacrifice is a completely separate thing. However, that's where my criticisms for this episode end. Everything else in this episode is amazing and acts as basically the most perfect ending they could have realistically given the series. It doesn't overstay its welcome, it's satisfying, emotional, funny, and action-packed. Everything that a show of this quality deserves. Dipper's final monologue at the end of the episode always makes me tear up. Amazing episode, with only a minor issue keeping it from a solid 10 out of 10.
Close your eyes, shut your mouth, dream a dream and get us out. Dream, 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 dream.
Dreamscapers introduces Bill Cipher, 10 out of 10.
What?
Okay, but for real, this episode is great. It's obvious that the writers didn't quite have Bill down pat yet, with his voice and animation being a little bit more choppy than in his future appearances. But he's still his sadistic self regardless. Gideon is more menacing in this episode, as we actually see him use the journal he has for once. The dreamscape itself is a great set piece, and the atmosphere it builds is stellar. It does, however, suffer from the tired character overhears part of a conversation and takes it one way, but it turns out it actually meant the opposite. It was overused when Shrek did it years prior, and it's overused here. However, that's my only real nitpick. Bill is depicted as being a bit less powerful in this one, but that's mostly because he doesn't see the twins as a threat yet. And the ending cliffhanger is great too, and leads nicely into the season finale.
You have something I want.
Gideon Rises is the final episode of season 1 of the show, and it's really solid. The episode does a fantastic job at calling back to the previous episodes with the gnomes and the grappling hook. Gideon is legitimately a threat in this episode, and the fight on the bridge and Gideon's ultimate downfall was satisfying as hell to watch unfold. An excellent finale, and the ending with Stan and the journals is absolutely insane. Amazing. It's only beaten out by the most predictable number 1 pick imaginable.
No, you clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger.
You all already knew this would be number 1, but really, how could it not be? Not What He Seems is one of the greatest pieces of animation in the history of the medium. Everything about it is masterfully crafted to deliver on the biggest mystery in the show at the time. The intense atmosphere with the literal ticking clock until at last the twins have a chance to stop Stan once and for all, but Mabel chooses to trust him, something Dipper was unwilling to do. This is by far the best moment for Mabel, which means you know I'm serious about this one, because I'm giving praise to a scene where Mabel does something. I have zero qualms with calling this the best episode of Gravity Falls, and I'm sure most, if not all of you, will agree.
As much as I've complained throughout this video about some of the pitfalls of Gravity Falls, I can't deny that I still love it to bits. Because of how critical I've been in this video, I'm expecting quite a few comments to the effect of, is this guy really bullying a fictional 12-year-old? That's a big yikes, my guy. And I promise that that isn't the case. Mabel isn't a character that I like very much, but that doesn't mean I hate her. It's just that the problems with her characterization make her difficult for me to tolerate, because all of the pieces for a well-rounded, likable character are there, they just don't stick the landing with the development, which is arguably the most important part to get right. Pacifica is an extremely one-note character throughout most of the series, but in Gulf War and Northwest Mansion Mystery, we get to understand her better and watch her develop. The closest we get to that for Mabel is Weirdmageddon Part 2, and a story in a graphic novel where she gives a half-assed apology for being selfish. Mabel's characterization and the Dipper Wendy arc are really my only two big problems with this show. I mean, what else is there to say about the positives that haven't already been discussed to death? The music is outstanding, the writing, the comedy, the drama, the monsters, and the mystery. They're all top-notch. And just because this video hasn't been 40 minutes of me joining in on praising the show, doesn't mean I like it any less. Gravity Falls is easily in my top 10 favorite shows of all time, maybe even top 5 on a good day. I don't want anyone's takeaway from this video to be, oh, he hates Mabel, or he hates Dipper being interested in Wendy, because I don't. Like I said before, I love the idea of Dipper pursuing a girl he can't realistically be with. I think the execution just wasn't as good as it had the potential to be. There's no voice of reason to tell him, hey, that's never gonna happen, meaning the show frames the situation as though it's legitimately a possibility, which it obviously isn't. I think if there was said voice of reason to ground Dipper, or if the entire idea was played more for laughs than a serious character conflict, the idea would be elevated significantly. And look, I'm not gonna deny that I like this show less than I did back when I watched it in 2017 for the first time. But I'm a big boy now, whose taste in shows has shifted from talking trains, demonic triangles, and dual-hearted time travelers, to funny community colleges, kids named Finger, and dual-hearted time travelers pre-2018. I'm hardly the target demographic for this series, so it's kind of insane that the show holds up as well as it does. I love this show, and as harsh as I may have sounded in this video, it's all said in love. If the show is greenlit for a new series, which frankly I don't think it will be, but if it is, I hope that Alex Hirsch's team will take on the fans' feedback and create potentially the greatest comeback in animated history. But honestly, even if none of that happens, I would be perfectly content to just leave it where it is. Mamma mia, that was a spicy video. It was also obscenely long. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, this is Media Review Mike, signing out.